Hello, my name is Jack. I'm a big fan of Call of Duty Zombies, and I'm going to explain to you, to the best of my ability, the Call of Duty Zombies story and a little bit of background on the Call of Duty Zombies before we start. This is going to be unscripted, completely, just off the top of my head. I'm probably going to get some stuff wrong. Expect some misinformation, but I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, because I love this game, and I know way too much about it. I'm not a lore crazy person like the great Mr. Raffle Waffles. Thank you for all your Easter egg tutorials, my friend. You are wonderful. But to give some background, Call of Duty Zombies started with Call of Duty World at War. World at War was the first zombies mode they ever did. It was a side mode that started as an Easter egg in World at War. It was a side mode they worked on as a essentially as a this is stuff you can easily find out on your own, but like this is like very common knowledge at this point. But it was a side mode worked on by the developers while they were making the game, and they liked it so much they snuck it into the game. I forget the exact details, but it got put in the game at the end of the day. People really liked it, so they started releasing maps every DLC. So the story didn't start coming in until about the third or fourth map. The third map we get our wonderful characters. We get our 4 original characters, because the first 2 maps kind of disconnect from the rest of the storyline. They take place, but they're kind of disconnected, so I'm not really going to dig deep into Nocturne, Toten, and Verrucht. Verrucht is kind of important because one of the characters on Verrucht will be one of our 4 main characters. He doesn't have the same voice actor in that map, and in fact, the soldiers on Verrucht don't really have really interesting, unique voices. You can't really tell who they are, because it is, like, this wasn't planned, obviously. It clearly wasn't planned. But all you need to know is that Tank Dempsey, the American soldier, in our 4 main characters, who will be our main characters for a while, who we will call Ultimus, because that was what they have been dubbed, Takeo Misaki, Edward Richtofen, Nikolai Belinsky, and Tank Dempsey. Those are our 4 characters. They are dubbed Ultimus. Well, this version of them is dubbed Ultimus in the grander scheme of the story. This is done way later. I think this was knowledge out around Black Ops 3, but that is a tangent for when we get there. But for now, I will just dub these guys Ultimus to quickly explain who these people are. So Takeo, Nikolai, and Tank are essentially test subjects for Group 935, which is this Russian science group that is working, that are funded by the Nazis, roughly, that are funded by the Nazis because they were a group coming up while Hitler's rise to power, in the story, roughly, I forget. But they are funded by the German government, and they do crazy, they are into really, like, weird stuff, obviously. Historically, Hitler is known for being into some really weird shit and trying to find some really weird shit. Obviously, we see films like that with Raiders of the Lost Ark, and, Indiana Jones is a really simple thing, but they are known for, like, excavating and artifacts and stuff. It's a whole thing. I'm sure there's history on that. If I'm incorrect on that, I am sorry. I'm pretty sure that's true. I'm sorry. I'm not fact-checking this. This is off the cuff. Me explain. It doesn't matter. This is irrelevant information. Point is, Edward Richtofen is experimenting on these 3 people who are being experimented on by Group 935. Group 935 is led by a guy named Ludwig Maxis. I think. Dr. Ludwig Maxis. Yeah, I think that's his name. I forget. I think his first name's Ludwig, if I'm correct. I forget. I'm pretty sure. Ludwig von Max. I forget. I think that's his name. I forget. It's just, let's call him Maxis. Maxis is the doctor. Dr. Maxis. He is Richtofen's superior, and they are experimenting with this element that is crash landed in a Japanese swamp. This is the first meteorite. And it's this element that they dub 115. and they experiment on it, and they make weaponry, and they end up creating zombies using this element. And so what ends up happening is they're trying to control the zombies and stuff. And while this is all happening, Richtofen, because he gets exposed to 115 and some stuff, he starts going crazy. He starts going, like, he gets this link to the aether and Agartha and this whole thing. Basically, what element 115 does is it kind of drives people crazy. It really messes with their head. And what ends up happening is Richtofen, lusting for power, ends up teleporting Maxis and his daughter. Maxis and Maxis' daughter, not Richtofen, Maxis and Maxis' daughter, who is named Samantha, into the aether. And all this air. This backfires immensely. So Samantha ends up taking control of the aether somehow. This like little, like, I think 10-year-old girl ends up taking control of the aether, and she ends up getting power over like element 115. I forget. It's complicated. I don't know the specifics, but Samantha ends up essentially controlling the zombies. And she is out for blood against Richtofen. She is mad. I mean, as any girl would be if their dad's employee or subordinate tried to kill them. Richtofen's like, well, I want to get that power. Looks like I need some help. So he ends up taking 3 test subjects. And to give you an idea, these guys are essentially stereotypes. These are very broad stereotypes of what are like the 4 big factions that everyone knows from World War II. The Germans, the Japanese, the Americans, and the Russians. And so what ends up happening is that Richtofen takes these four people and they go to a Japanese swamp. I forget what they're doing here. This swamp is called Shinonuma, and the map is called Shinonuma. But I forget what they're doing now exactly. And what ends up happening is Richtofen, I think, gets his diary that he has there. I forget the exact specifics. I don't remember the specifics. I don't know the specifics. This is where I'm not like super well versed on certain aspects of the story on why they're in certain places, but I know like a broad idea. And so they go to the swamp, and they end up going to the facility that Richtofen worked at, which is called Doris, or the Giant. I forget what they're doing there. I should know. This sucks. I wish I could better explain this. Once we get to a certain point, I will be able to explain this much better. Also, I will not be getting into the comics, because there are comics, and I've not read them, but I would like to read them someday, but I'm not getting into those, because that's a whole other can of worms. So what ends up happening is, while they're at the Giant, or Doris, Dempsey, the crazy American, hoorah, the American guy, he has the Wonder Waff, which is essentially a Tesla gun. It's like 3 little light bulbs filled with electricity. You shoot giant bursts of electricity. It's wild. It's really cool. If you know what zombies is, you know what this is. Obviously. What ends up happening is, while they're in a teleporter, or like on a teleporter, Dempsey shoots the Wonder Waff, and this like supercharges the teleporter and sends them 20 years in the future. They time travel 20 years in the future. And it's like, oh. And they time travel into this German facility inside of a abandoned theater. It was, I think, another Group 9-5 place, and where I think it had to do with Nova 6 experiments, which is a thing from the Black Ops series. Okay, we're on to Black Ops now, by the way. What were the 4 first maps we just discussed are the World at War maps. Now we're on Black Ops, which is Kino der Toten. So what ends up happening is that they end up going to a Russian cosmodrome. And while they're there, I don't know what they're doing at Ascension, which is the Russian cosmodrome. I wish I knew. But while this is happening, JFK, Nixon, Castro, and Robert McNamara are fighting zombies at the Pentagon. That is just something happening while this whole Russian cosmodrome thing is happening, where there are our four main characters at the Russian cosmodrome. They help a doctor. Our four characters help a doctor who worked on the Ascension Project, which is a project inside of like the Black Ops universe and in zombies. They worked on like 115 experiments and zombies, because it was basically doctors picked up from like the old Nazi days. You know, after, you know, like Operation Paperclip and stuff back, because this is just a whole thing that happened. Where, the Americans and Russians, I say Operation Paperclip, but that's the American thing, where they basically got picked up. Well, no, actually, Operation Paperclip might be something else. I forget. I might be wrong. If I am wrong, I'm so sorry. I should know this, but I'm getting all the memories. All the information's mush. But essentially, all you need to know is after World War II, German scientists were picked up by the USSR and the USA and put on projects of theirs. And in the zombie storyline, Group 935 scientists were plucked up and developed 115 related stuff for the Americans and the Russians, at least in this story that we're going for. Gersh, I forget, I think Gersh is just Russian scientist. But Dr. Gersh and another guy named Yuri something. I forget what Yuri's last name is. Yuri and Gersh are two doctors. Samantha gets in contact with Yuri, and Yuri starts doing Samantha's bidding. He ends up going to the Pentagon and like stealing guns from our friends over the Pentagon. This sounds insane, I know, but that's like a whole mechanic on 5. I'm not really getting into 5 because it's not important at the moment. Because it's really not important to the grander scheme of the story, unfortunately. But it's just because Samantha's trying to destroy everything related to Group 935 and one of... I think that's essentially what's going on here, if I remember correctly. She's just trying to get rid of... destroy everything related to Group 935 because she's angry at Rick Toff and everything. And so what ends up happening is our boys, Ultimus, end up helping Dr. Gersh, who is stuck in the aether, I think. And they help him, they free him. Gersh ends up wandering for a long time. I forget exactly what they were at the Cosmodrome for, but they end up helping Gersh get free from Samantha. So after that, there's another teleporting into the future thing. And they teleport to, I think, roughly the year 2010, where... George A. Romero is filming a movie called Call of the Dead, based off of the zombie experiments that Group 935 did. He's filming at a Siberian facility, a Siberian Group 935 facility, where Dempsey was actually experimented on, I think, in the story. So George is filming Call of the Dead. Call of the Dead is starring Sarah Michelle Gellar, Robert Englund, Danny Trejo, and I forget the fourth guy's name. The fourth guy, he played Michael Rooker, who also ended up playing, because Michael Rooker worked so well with Treyarch, they ended up having him play Harper in Black Ops 2, which is cool. So Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michael Rooker, Robert Englund, and Danny Trejo are the 4 stars of Call of the Dead. Ultimus ends up teleporting to the filming set, and they're stuck in a closet, and they can't get out of it. So zombies are going crazy, destroying the whole cast and crew, and our 4 actors are having to fight off the zombie horde. And they end up getting in contact with Ultimus, and Richtofen starts being like, "Hey, can you give me this?" And they run around and they do some stuff for Ultimus while they're in the closet. And eventually, you distract them by. Eventually, you give them a bottle of vodka. Nikolai gets drunk. Dempsey, Takio's just barfing his guts out because they couldn't get. Because Tom Kane was unavailable to voice Takio at this time. It's a really funny story, actually. It's a really funny story that they ended up in Call of the Dead. Takio's, instead of talking, he just barfs the entire time. I don't know who did the voice acting for the barf, but they couldn't get Tom Kane at the time. And so Takio just doesn't talk, he just barfs. And Dempsey and Nikolai are like partying, like after drinking the alcohol. They're just partying in the little closet, the little storage closet. And Richtofen's like, "Hey, can you give me this thing called the Golden Rod?" And so our 4 actors go on this little quest, and they get something called the Golden Rod. The Golden Rod is this little like golden object. It's got little like turny things on both sides. It's a cool thing. But they give it to Richtofen. And what ends up happening is after this happens, Richtofen leaves. Our 4 actors, I think, die in the story. They end up dying. George Romero is definitely dead because he's been turned into a zombie. He's a goner. He's dead. He's a zombie now. And he's a fucking scary zombie too. But I think the 4 actors end up dying. There's also some extra little like added stuff later that gets added in, like zombies. That's a whole nother thing, but there's some more story related to Call of the Dead that pops up way later. It's really interesting stuff, but it doesn't have anything to do with our main story and quests that we're talking about. So I won't really get into I'm not really going to get into all the side information. I'm just going to get into the main story and other things as they become important. So they leave Call of the Dead and they end up teleporting to Shangri-La. And Shangri-La is this big, I think it's like in a Mayan jungle, I forget what the exact story of, no, I think it's Indian actually, I think it's an Indian place. I forget where Shangri-La takes place because it's kind of like, I don't think it's really like confirmed like what it is or where it takes place. But Richtofen's searching for this thing called the focusing stone, which I think is another object he needs. And on his adventure, on their way to get the focusing stone, they end up meeting these 2 guys named Brock and Gary, who are in a time loop. Brock and Gary, Shangri-La, I don't know what like the whole thing with Shangri-La is, but essentially, Brock and Gary are in a time loop. They are explorers that came to this jungle. And they are in an infinite time loop where they keep dying over and over and over again. And each time, and so our 4 crew members end up trying to help them. And every time they die, we get a little bit further. Eventually, they help them, but I don't think they actually, I think they end up dying either way. They're just goners. But you're helping them get further and further. Eventually, while helping Brock and Gary, they end up blowing up a hole in a wall, and they get the focusing stone, which Richtofen combines with the golden rod. So the reason Richtofen needs the golden rod and focusing stone will soon become apparent once we get to Moon. I don't know like the exact specifics of how it works and why he needs it, but I know what it's used for. That's the important thing. I know what it's used for. So this is where it gets tricky, because if we're just doing what originally happened in Black Ops 1, then we jump straight into Moon. But there's a little bit extra that may or may not be canon to the original timeline. So I'm going to cover it now for the sake of this. I'm going to cover Classified, which is a map from Black Ops 4. Classified may or may not be canon. I don't know the exact specifics if it's canon. It fits into our original crew story pretty well. But classified's importance will become more explained later because it's less of, it's literally just an extra little story planted in the story. But classified's importance doesn't become apparent until near the end. Classified is essentially it's the Pentagon. It's where we fought the zombies as JFK, Robert McNamara, Nixon, and Fidel Castro. They teleport back to the Pentagon. It's another scenario where Dempsey shot the wonder weapon of Shangri-La while they were teleporting, which is the 3971 JGB something. It's a bunch of letters. Most people just call it the baby gun because when you shoot zombies, they become small and you punt them and they go flying. But it's got a way longer name. I'm not gonna, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. I think I know it off pretty well. I got close. I know I didn't get it right though. But to get to classified, I'm still gonna say it's essentially just a little extra thing. It's not really important for the greater zombie story, but I'm just gonna throw it in because it is something we will come to later, and I think it's a part of the original story, but it wasn't amended to the story until all the way in Black Ops 4. And this is the Black Ops 1 story I'm referring to right now, from Kino der Toten to Moon. So they end up going to the Pentagon if classified is to be added to the original story after Shangri-La, and they end up getting to the Moon. They end up getting to Groom Lake, which is Area 51, and on Groom Lake, they teleport up to the Moon. And now that they're on the Moon, there's this thing called the MPD, which is the Moon Pyramid device. It's literally a pyramid on the Moon. It's called the MPD because it is a Moon Pyramid device. It is a pyramid device on the Moon. Yes. So they end up opening the pyramid device, and it's revealed that Samantha is in the pyramid device. This is where I think it's like a link to the aether and everything. So this is you see Samantha's physical body. She has been our main antagonist for so long now. But Richtofen's not exactly a good guy either. So that's a whole another thing. So while on the Moon, Richtofen supercharges the Golden Rod and the Focusing Stone. Maxis, who is killed himself in the aether, is now living on through technology, and he tries to stop Richtofen from supercharging the Golden Rod. Maxis unfortunately fails. And what ends up happening is Richtofen, using the Focusing Stone and the Golden Rod and another little orb that was on the Moon. I don't know what it's called. I forget. He switches souls with Samantha. What I mean he switches souls is Richtofen's soul goes into Samantha's body, and Samantha's soul goes into Richtofen's body. So now that Richtofen is in Samantha's body, he has control of the aether. And our three characters, Takeo, Nikolai, and Richtofen. Takeo, Nikolai, and Dempsey. Not Richtofen, because Richtofen's now in Samantha. And now Takeo, Nikolai, and Dempsey are joined by Samantha inside of Richtofen's body. And Maxis is like, okay, here's how it's going to go. We're going to do this thing. And so our three guys end up working with Maxis, and they blow up the Earth. Which ends up severing Richtofen's link to the aether just a little bit. He still has control over the zombies, but his power is somewhat severed now. And that's where Black Ops 1 ends. The Earth is blown up. Real wild ending. But now we're going to go into Black Ops 2. In Black Ops 2, Zombies begins with 4 new characters, which we are going to refer to as Victus, because that is their name in the storyline. There's 3 main big groups. There's Ultimus, Primus, and Victus. Ultimus is the original group. Victus is the group we're talking about now. And we will get to Primus later. So, Victus is a group of 4 people surviving in the apocalyptic wasteland of this blown up Earth. Lava's everywhere. Earth is like extremely destroyed. It's crazy. And it's a zombie apocalypse now on Earth because of the blowing up Earth, and Richtofen now in the aether, he's doing all this shit with zombies. So we have our 4 characters who we're going to talk about. We have Marlton Johnson, who is a really dorky dude. Russman, no last name. We don't know his last name. He's just Russman. Russman is a former employee. He's gone crazy because of experiment. Russman has gone crazy due to contact with Element 115, and he's lost a lot of memories. His brain is all jumbled up now. But he worked for a group called Broken Arrow, which was an American group that I think did a lot of Group 935 type stuff, experiments with 115. They are very much linked to that history of the of Group 935, but it's a secret American division. But Broken Arrow is interesting because fun fact, I think it's really interesting that it's called Broken Arrow. This doesn't really have to do with anything, but broken arrows are actually the term broken arrow is used for unaccounted for nukes, like lost nukes. Which is interesting that this group is called Broken Arrow, this group that works with Element 115. I don't know if there's a reasoning for that. I just think it's really interesting. But Broken Arrow, Russman worked for Broken Arrow. I don't really know much about Broken Arrow, but I just thought I'd go into it because it was an American group that worked with 935. Broken Arrow becomes a little bit more important later. They have importance to the story. They did a lot of stuff. They created a lot of stuff, but I'm not really going to get into them right now. Sorry, I got on a tangent about Russman, but that's Russman's character. He's just kind of a crazy one. Marlton Johnson, who's this nerdy guy. Russman, who worked for Broken Arrow, like I said. Misty, who is like, she's just a cowgirl, southern hardworking woman. Like, she's just a hardworking woman, very like she's like a farmer girl, I don't know like what she actually does in story, but that's kind of what she is. And a guy named Samuel Stuhlinger, who we're gonna get into a little bit more later. And the reason we're gonna get into him later is because Samuel has a mind link with Richtofen. Richtofen can communicate with Sam, which is interesting. Why Richtofen can communicate to Samuel is Samuel Stuhlinger was a part of a group known as the Flesh in the zombie storyline. The Flesh, their whole deal is they eat zombies. They eat zombie flesh. I think it's like some weird like cult thing. But Stuhlinger is like a really big like conspiracy theorist guy. He's all into conspiracies and shit. And he's just like this old conspiracy theorist. And he ended up in this group called the Flesh, which ate zombies. Because they ate zombies, and Richtofen can communicate with the zombies. And also, fun fact, Richtofen can also bring people back to life because of his powers of the aether, and he can bring zombies back to life just because he feels like it. I don't know. It's really weird. I think that's what he can do because he does it like quite a few times, and it's hinted at that Victus actually dies like once or twice because they end up dying in a cutscene, and then they just get brought back to life. It's really weird. But Victus, Richtofen can communicate to Sam, and Richtofen's like, hey, can you do this thing for me? But at the same time, Maxis, in a radio, gets in contact with Victus, is like, hey, I want you to do this thing instead. So it's essentially Richtofen and Maxis vying against each other, and they're trying to get these groups to further their goals. That is what happens. They're trying to light pyres. These like these towers. They gotta light the 3 towers. Which will reconnect the aether And so Maxis wants the group to do this in a way that'll benefit him. Well, Richtofen wants to do it in a way that will benefit him. So depending on your route, so they start in Washington. And they fight this thing called the Avogadro, which is this electric creature. It's like an electric creature. We'll get into that later because he's a little bit more important later. And I'll get into that. But the Avogadro is just this little electric thing inside of a Washington, like, power plant for some reason. He's just inside of a Washington power plant. Just is. And so what happens is, what ends up happening is they're in Washington and they light a they light the tower in Washington. Who they do it for is up to you. The canon choice is Maxis. That is like the canon story choice, is they help Maxis. So I'm going to go down the Maxis route because that is the canon story. And what ends up happening is they light the tower for Maxis, in the story at least. And then they go to China. They light a tower there. And they wander around the desert. And there's this old western town inside of, like, under an African mining facility. Because the world is just all fucked up now. And they meet this guy, like, and there's just this big dude named, like, Leroy down there, who, like, helps them do shit. He's like an old, like, he can't really talk. He's like, but he just helps you. He's cool. And that's buried. That's, so Die-Rise was the high rise in China. And buried. So Victus, Marlton, Stuhlinger, Misty, and Rushman end up lighting the 3 towers. And they reopen the link to Agartha. If Richtofen succeeds, he gets rid of Maxis, and he goes into Samuel, and he ends up taking over Samuel Stuhlinger to do, like, whatever he feels like. You know, that's just kind of his own thing. He's like, yeah, I got a human body now. I can do whatever I want. I control the aether. You know. If you end up helping Maxis takes control of aether and goes power crazy. He's the control of aether. And he has Samantha, and he plucks Samantha from Richtofen's body and all that. And he just ends up putting Richtofen into a random zombie. So Richtofen is just destined to die and come back as a zombie over and over again. Which is really funny. So he's just like, fuck you, Richtofen. And so what ends up happening is Samantha doesn't really like what's going on with her dad. And after the Earth gets destroyed from Maxis going crazy, I think no matter what happens, the Earth just gets fucked. It just gets destroyed. And Samantha ends up getting in contact with, who would have guessed, a alternate timeline version of Dr. Ludwig Maxis. And this alternate timeline, Group 935, was created much earlier. Instead of being formed sometime before World War II, it was formed before World War I. And the Germans are in France. It's very steampunk. It's a little bit futuristic. Dr. Ludwig Maxis and Edward Richtofen are doing an excavation mission in France during World War I. And I think it has to do with 1 and 5. And they end up uncovering, who would have guessed, zombies. And on this field, we see some other familiar faces. Tank Dempsey, Nikolai Belinsky, and Takeo Misaki. And these 4 soldiers, who we knew as very broad cultural stereotypes, are now much younger. It is World War I. So I think they're like roughly, they were born in the same time period as our original characters. They're just much younger now because it takes place earlier in the timeline. But it's an alternate universe compared to, this is an alternate version of these characters. These are not the same versions. This is premise. Our original versions of those 4 original characters are Ultimus. Those are the ones that did their whole thing during World War II and traveled through time, and that was Richtofen that got power. And now we're talking about Primus here. And this opens the multiverse. There is so many Richtofens and Nikolais and Takios and Tanks. There's so many of them. And Samantha gets in contact with our 4 characters. And they're like, can we trust this? You know, they're very uneasy allies. These are Takio, Nikolai, and Dempsey were all sent to France to, I think it was like on a mission to see what the Germans were doing roughly. And I forget like the exact like story reasons for why they're there, but they're soldiers who were sent there to do some shit about what's going on here in France. I think so. And our 4 characters end up becoming uneasy allies. This is a Richtofen who is unaffected by the aether. This is a not crazy Richtofen. This is a much younger and more sane Richtofen. This guy, we're going to get more into this Richtofen later. Because this is when, this is the end of Black Ops 2, by the way. Origins. And Samantha's like, I need your help. And they end up helping Samantha. And Samantha and Maxis get reunited. And they end up in this place called the House. There's a lot of stuff here. Richtofen does a lot of stuff between Black Ops 2, between Origins, and Richtofen does a lot of stuff between Origins, which was the final map of Black Ops 2, and the beginning of Black Ops 3. He's gone for our 4 characters. He's gone for a year. I don't know what happened. I don't know what Nikolai. I forget. Like I don't know the specifics of what's going on here. But Richtofen gets reads this book called the Chronorium. And it's a book that knows all of whatever will happen and what can happen. And it changes depending on who reads it. And it tells them basically what to do to ensure things happen in a certain way. And I did skip a map, by the way. I skipped Mob of the Dead, which I will get to. I'll get to a little bit later, because its importance is not known for a while. So after Origins, our 4 characters end up getting split up. Richtofen does his own thing for a long time, and our other 3 characters end up somehow they end up in another universe at the Giant facility. At the moment, Ultimus Richtofen teleported Maxis and Samantha into the aether. This moment is very important, because this is the beginning of Richtofen's journey, the original Richtofen's journey.